Richard of York led an army of between 3 and 7,000 men south towards London, meeting Henry's force of 2,000 at St Albans on May 22nd, 1455. While having less than 200 casualties, Richard of York was victorious and had captured Henry VI during his vain attempt to hide in a tanner's shop. Edmund Beaufort, 2nd Duke of Somerset, Henry Percy, 2nd Earl of Northumberland, and Thomas Clifford, 8th Baron de Clifford, were killed in the fighting. This, along with Henry's capture, allowed Richard to become Lord Protector by Parliament, once again restoring the York family to power. York's allies quickly ascended thanks to the temporary stability, including the 16th Earl of Warwick, also called Richard Neville, who had conducted anti-piracy operations in the Channel. Warwick would overtake his father, Richard Neville, 5th Earl of Salisbury, to become York's key ally. Warwick's position in Calais allowed him to be in command of England's largest standing army. Margaret of Anjou, Henry VI's wife, considered Warwick a major threat to the throne and attempted to cut supplies. This would have worked if not for fear of a French invasion in August 1457, forcing Margaret to rescind the cut. In 1456, Henry recovered his mental faculties and again relieved Richard of York from his office, enacting personal governance over the realm. Despite this brief peace, fighting once again broke out between the Neville and Percy families. Henry tried to broker a public display of reconciliation at St Paul's Cathedral in March 1458, but immediately after the gathering, the plotting was back on. While Henry was trying to make attempts to secure peace, Warwick, in disregard of royal authority, conducted attacks against the Castilian fleet in May 1458, and then against a fleet of the Hanseatic League weeks later. His position in Calais allowed relations between Charles VII of France and Philip the Good of Burgundy. In response to the attacks, Warwick was summoned to London to face inquiries along with Richard of York and the Duke of Salisbury. They all refused the summons. Instead, they rendezvoused at Ludlow Castle in Wales. Margaret of Anjou was an idol during this time and had actively been growing numbers to support Henry. She would distribute a livery emblem of a silver swan to knights, enlisted by her personally. Before Warwick reached the meeting, the 5,000 men under Salisbury were ambushed by a Lancastrian force twice their number under James Touchet. The Yorkists once again secured victory, and James was killed in the fighting. In the September, Warwick marched into England proper, but were dispersed thanks to a defection of troops under Andrew Trollope. Forced to escape, York was still Lieutenant of Ireland and escaped with his second son, Edmund, Earl of Rutland, while Warwick and Salisbury made for Calais. The Lancastrians appointed Henry Beaufort, Duke of Somerset, to replace Warwick in Calais, but the garrison remained loyal to the Yorkists. The Lancastrians would assemble a parliament of devils for one purpose: to attain Richard of York, his sons, Salisbury, and Warwick. But this act caused many uncommitted lords to fear for their titles. In late June 1460, Warwick and Salisbury sailed across the Channel and marched north to London, gaining a widespread support. Salisbury would besiege the Tower of London, while Warwick pursued Henry north. They would defeat Henry's force at Northampton in July, killing Humphrey Stafford, 1st Duke of Buckingham, John Talbot, 2nd Earl of Shrewsbury, John Beaumont, 1st Viscount Beaumont, and Thomas Percy, 1st Baron Egremont, as they defended their king. Again, Henry VI was captured and escorted back to London. In September, Richard of York returned from Ireland, and at Parliament in October, he made a gesture to claim the English throne by placing his hand upon it. This gesture shocked the assembly, so much so that York's allies were shocked by the move. Assessing York's claim, the judges felt they could not determine who had priority of succession, and declared the subject above the law and past their learning. The Act of Accord was passed through in late October, and there was little support to usurp Henry VI. The Accord stated that, after Henry died, His son Edward would be disinherited, and the throne would pass to York. The compromise was deemed unpalatable, and hostilities resumed. Queen Margaret and her son fled to Harlech Castle, joining Henry's half-brother, Jasper Tudor. They had been hard at work recruiting troops in Wales and the West Country, allowing Margaret to head north to Scotland and negotiate aid. She managed to gain the troops needed in return for Berwick. A similar negotiation was used to gain French support in return for the surrender of Jersey and the Channel Islands. Ultimately, it didn't fall through. The Lancastrians rallied in northern England, where the Percy family gathered support and were joined by Somerset and the Thomas Courtenay, 6th and 14th Earl of Devon. York and his son, the Earl of Rutland, along with Salisbury, left London to contain this threat to their sovereignty. On 16th of December 1460, the two forces clashed at the Battle of Worksop, and the Lancastrians had their victory. 5 days later, York reached his fortress of Sandown Castle near Wakefield, where the Lancastrians encamped 9 miles away. For some unknown reason, York sortied from the castle on 30th of December, and in the following Battle of Wakefield, Richard of York, the Earl of Rutland, and Warwick's brother, Thomas Neville, were killed. Salisbury would be captured the following night and executed. Following the defeats, Edward, Earl of March, Richard of York's 18-year-old son, was now heir to the Dukedom of York and inherited his father's claim to the throne. He sought to prevent Lancastrian armies gathering under the Tudors in Western England and consolidating with their forces in the north. In early February 1461, he would defeat the forces at Mortimer's Cross and captured Owen Tudor, husband to Catherine of Valois, Henry V's widow, and executed. The following morning, a perihelion appeared in the sky. Edward calmed his troops by reassuring them it was the Holy Trinity blessing their cause. Margaret would move her forces down south towards London, meeting and defeating Warwick's forces when they met at Watling Street at St Albans. Henry VI was freed from Yorkist captivity and knighted his son Edward of Westminster, who in turn knighted 30 Lancastrian leaders. Warwick marched to meet with Yorkist troops in the Marches, fresh from their victory at Mortimer's Cross. While they held a strategic victory, the Lancastrians were widely unpopular in London, and the citizens refused entry to Margaret's army. Warwick and Edward would seize the opportunity and race to London. This allowed Edward to become Edward IV of England in a hastily assembled gathering. Contemporaries describe him as energetic, handsome, affable, and struck an imposing sight in full armour and resplendent clothing. To cement Edward's position, he and Warwick moved north to confront the Lancastrians, with Warwick's vanguard inconclusively fought the Lancastrians at Ferrybridge in March. While not being a clear outcome, Warwick had been wounded, and the Lancastrians lost Barons Clifford and Neville. Edward would enlarge the main force the following day near Towton, Yorkshire. This would become the bloodiest battle on English soil and crush Lancastrian resistance in the north. Henry Percy, Andrew Trollope, and James Butler were all killed, and Henry, Margaret, and their son fled north to Scotland. Warwick would remain in the north to pacify any Lancastrian resistance. Edward would return to London to formally be crowned king in late June 1461 at Westminster Abbey. He wished to win affection from his foes, and thus pardoned many Lancastrians he had detained at his victory at Towton. For Warwick's part, he was rewarded handsomely, being made High Admiral of England, Steward of the Duchy of Lancaster, along with many minor offices. In summer 1462, he successfully negotiated a truce with Scotland, while the Lancastrians in Ireland were forced out by Thomas Fitzgerald, 7th Earl of Desmond. In spring 1461, the north of England erupted in revolt in favour of Lancastrian rule. Warwick managed to recover much of the territory by 1464 after negotiating truces with France and Scotland. The Lancastrians moved south through Northumberland, but was destroyed by a Yorkist army under John Neville at Hexham. Henry Beaufort, Baron Ross, and the Baron Hungerford were all captured and executed. Henry was again captured in the woods near River Ribble. All this meant that all resistance to Edward IV was now wiped out. Edward had no interest in killing Henry while his son was alive, preferring to keep the claim with a frail example. Margaret and their son left Scotland for sanctuary within the court of Louis XI of France.